Vikes now, I'm Spitfire Koda. That is correct. I am not tested, nor am I brev. It's me alone for a solo show tonight. I hope you guys are okay with that. First and foremost, obviously, not the outcome I think a lot of us were expecting tonight. Coming away with a 29-31 loss against the Lions was, I think, for most people, not expected. I think those of us who had this as a loss had it as a much, much, much less close game. Those of us that had it as a win probably had it as just as close as a game. I personally came into this game expecting a loss, though hoping for a win. When I made my preseason prediction all those months ago, I had us at this point with 2 losses, our first loss being against the Texans. So to have us lose 31-29 on what should have been our in my prediction, second loss of the season, I'm not mad. I am not as upset about this as a lot of other Vikings fans were today. And I think a lot of the people who were very upset have now started to calm down after taking the time to take a breather, watch some of the other games, or if you're like me, wash their car. And I mean, like, actually physically wash my car. I did not go to a place. I physically washed my car today to help cool off and think about the game. But obviously, again, after going 5 straight wins, you don't want a loss, especially not at home. But I think that this loss was necessary before we go into sort of our more easy, quote unquote, stretch of the schedule. After this game, there's a quick turnaround, and the Vikings will be here in LA playing the Rams. Come say hi if you are attending that game. I know myself and Dustin and a few other of your Vikings Twitter favorites will be at the game. But let's break it down, shall we? Let's start off by comparing Sam Darnold and Jared Goff, because a lot of people were blaming Sam Darnold for that loss. And I personally, I don't think that's fair. I do not think that that is a fair place to put your blame whatsoever. You had Jared Goff, who went 22 for 25 versus Sam Darnold's 22 for 27. That means he missed 5 throws. And everyone is saying that it was his fault. I can think of maybe 3 of those throws where I'm like, what are you doing, Sammy? 2 of those throws, I'm like, maybe not the best choice. One in particular is when Sam Darnold just threw it straight at Aaron Jones' feet, but I believe it was to avoid a pretty big sack for a loss of yards. And I personally, I don't blame him for that interception. I personally don't. I think that Addison could have worked a little bit harder to try and catch that ball. In fact, I think it was a very easily caught ball for Addison had he had not just stopped running. Continuing on, Jared Goff had 280 yards compared to Sam Darnold's 259 yards. Sam Darnold had an 81.5% completion rate against Jared Goff's 88. Sam Darnold was 1 touchdown for 1 interception. Jared Goff was 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. And honestly, just looking at these stats, they were neck and neck. If you look at the stats for most of the game, I believe on almost every single front, the Vikings either slightly led or were slightly behind the Lions in regards to possession, first downs. In fact, in penalties, we both had 8 penalties. I think the Lion ended up with slightly more yards and penalties. But overall, this is not a game to be upset that we lost over. If anything, this is a game to look at and be like, first of all, now we truly know how we stand against Super Bowl contenders. Yes, we played against the Texans, who were considered Super Bowl contenders, but they just barely lost against the Packers. So my other point that I would really like to make here is a lot of people, like I said earlier, are comparing this to potentially a similar season outcome as the 2016-2017 season. And I would like to say, Vikings fans, we have a tendency to go to worst case scenario right off the bat. I more so know that than anybody, considering I'm a very anxious guy, but my mind did not instantly go to, oh, we're repeating the 2016-2017 season. And it is purely because of the way that the stats that I just expressed earlier laid out. In the 2016-2017 season, it wasn't close in regards to a lot of the stats. We were either outplayed entirely on defense or we were outplayed entirely on offense. It was never really an equilibrium like today's game was. Additionally, by that, looking at the way that a lot of those games broke down talking about the Vikings, Lions, Vikings, Commies. They weren't called the Commanders at the time, though, and Cowboys, Vikings from the 2016-2017 season. The Vikings led by 1 whole point, or excuse me, were losing by 1 whole point that entire game against the Lions in 2016 until the third. So the Vikings at the Commanders, we were up by 20 until the third. And Cowboys, Vikings, we lost by 2. Looking at the stats of that game, it's very easy to tell that the offense just did not show up or the defense just allowed for things to happen. Notably, we had Sam God, I can't remember his last name, but that's how unrememberable he was for the worst possible way. Not to mention, we were still facing our kicker woes. Blair Walsh missed a bunch of extra points in those 3 games. And just overall, we were not playing at the level that we were playing in this game back in 2016-2017. I understand the concerns, but looking at it from a purely statistical and even personnel standpoint, this is not the same team. Not just literally, but in the way that we play. The 2024-2025 Vikings should not, knock on wood, of course, repeat the sins of the 2016-2017 Vikings, purely just looking at stats. The last thing that I really wanted to touch base on was the fact that the reason we lost this game, or at least in my opinion, one of the reasons we lost this game, is because the Lions exposed just how much of a Swiss cheese secondary we have. And I know at one point I had called out the fact that we were in zone, and somebody had mentioned on Twitter, actually we were in man, but Gilly just fell down. It shouldn't be just on Stefan. Oh my goodness. It shouldn't just be on Gilmore, though. It shouldn't just be on one cornerback to uphold the entire secondary. We need to have better corners. We have relied too heavily on the fact that our defensive line is so good that it distracts people from how bad our corners and our secondary truly are. Our defensive line has been absolutely phenomenal in putting pressure on these really, really good quarterbacks. So that way, by the time they do throw to their wide receivers, the throws are slightly off, or by that point, probably picked almost in the end zone by Andrew Van Ginkel. I think if anything is to happen in the next couple of weeks, Kevin O'Connell and Quays are going to need to sit down and they're going to see what secondary they can build before the trade deadline. They're going to need to see what cornerbacks are available to help build up the holes in that secondary. Additionally, offensively, it's very evident to me that the Vikings were trying to get Sam Darnold into a position where he can rely on TJ Hawkinson purely because of the amount of throws that he put over Johnny Munt's way. Of course, Johnny Munt is no TJ Hawkinson. Love the guy, but his production value is just not the same. There were multiple times throughout the game when Johnny Munt would get the ball and I go, if that was TJ Hawkinson, he would have broken that tackle. He would have had 2 more yards. So I think almost by treating certain aspects of this game as a practice for Sam Darnold kind of is what shot us in the foot. I'll be quite honest. Relying on Johnny Munt, who is tight end 2, tight end 3, to almost fill the shoes of TJ Hawkinson so that way Sam Darnold gets comfortable throwing to TJ Hawkinson. Why aren't you doing that in practice? Why are we trying that out for a really good Lions defense? And yes, they are really good, even despite the loss of Aiden Hutchinson. Not to mention, you can have the best defensive line, in the entire NFL. It's not going to matter if the Lions also have a fairly decent offensive line. And I think too, that Detroit Lions defensive line, despite not having Aiden Hutchinson, was able to expose a lot of the weaknesses that we very clearly have on our own offensive line without Dalton Reisner. They were able to pull multiple penalties from our offensive line of holding. On occasion, I believe there were a couple of illegal contacts on our offensive line as well. Ultimately, Dan Campbell does his homework. And to discount our loss because you don't like the Lions, to me, just feels shady. They were the better team today. And it isn't even because we are a worse team than the Lions. I personally think that we are as good of a team as the Lions, but there were just so many minute mistakes that we have been making over the course of these last 7 weeks that Dan Campbell knew, and he exploited them. And even Kevin O'Connell in his presser said that we were toe for toe stat wise, and it came down to little things that added up. Even Kevin O'Connell said that he missed a couple of calls, including that kick that I think most people were like, why not just give Will the Thrill the chance to see if he can make it? Which it turns out he decided against doing that purely because of that bizarre illegal formation call penalty on the Vikings offense at the very end of the game. But all in all, I don't think that Vikings fans should be going into this thinking that we're doomed, that this is it, that this is the 2016-2017 season relived. I think we should go into Thursday with a lot of hope. I personally believe that it's better for us to get this loss out now before we get into this easier stretch of games, because I have seen so many times as a fan of the NFL for the last 26 years, that oftentimes teams with such good records going into the easy schedule get complacent, they get lazy, they get sloppy, and that's how they get losses against some of these easy teams. This was a wake-up call. We have a short turnaround, and I do personally believe that we have the capability to win against this Rams team. They are so patchwork due to a lot of the injuries that they have. Not to mention that SoFi isn't really their home. We have seen time and time again that when the Rams play in their own stadium, it's almost like an away game for them. We know that Vikings travel well. In fact, we know that Vikings travel to SoFi really, really well. We've seen it against the Chargers. Additionally, I am unsure as to how that offensive line for the Rams is going to be able to hold up against Andrew Van Ginkel, Blake Cashman, if he is in, although I believe he should be, Dallas Turner, who I personally believe needs to step up more, Ivan Pace Jr., who I am very happy to finally see some production from, Joshua Metellus, who had a big game. I would have loved to have seen a little bit more from Cam Bynum, but you all know me, I love Cam Bynum. Ultimately, I think getting TJ Hawkinson, Dalton Reisner, Blake Cashman, and just getting those three guys back is really, really, really going to be key here. I think we were missing those pieces of our team today, and that ultimately, led to a lot of these really silly mistakes. Going into that Rams game, as I said earlier, I will be attending. I believe Dustin will also be attending. And there are obviously some more wonderful people from the Vikings community who will be there. So please come and say hi. I personally have the Rams game as a win. I personally believe that we will win. I'm going to say 28-14. That is where I believe the score will lie. I've never done this before, so if you've watched all of this, thank you so much for listening to my little yap session. No idea if it made any sense. I really hope it did. I don't work very well when it is just myself. I do better when I am prompted questions. But thank you so much for watching this episode of Vikes Now. Thank you for being adjustable and flexible and letting me just sort of ramble on at you guys. And Skull Vikes. Thanks. Bye.